On August 20th, 2013, 19-year-old Travis Langley and 20-year-old Derek Stanton disappeared without a trace while hiking the Appalachian Trail. Only in September 2015, after 2 years of fruitless searching, did Travis emerge from the woods alone 15 miles from the trailhead. He was extremely exhausted and dressed in a dirty lace wedding dress. It was immediately clear that there was something strange about this case. You will find out where the guy was for 2 years, where the other one is now, and what secret the wedding dress hides in this story. Some names and details in this story have been changed for the purpose of anonymity and confidentiality. Not all photos were taken at the scene. On August 17, 2013, at 7:30 in the morning, 19-year-old Travis Langley loaded his camera backpack into the trunk of an old SUV. According to his mother, Sarah Langley, it was an unusually humid morning in Bryson City, North Carolina, and the temperature was barely 65 degrees Fahrenheit. Travis, a sophomore who planned to pursue a career in environmental and wildlife studies, looked extremely focused. His father, Robert, recalled during the first interview that his son had made sure his Canon camera was in good working order and that he had spare batteries. Along with him on the short 2-day hike was his close friend, 20-year-old Derek Stanton, who, according to his classmates, was a physically fit young man with experience in the wilderness. The boys' route took them through one of the most heavily forested sections of the Appalachian Trail in Swain County. This area is known for its dense coniferous forests, where the continuous canopy of trees creates semi-darkness even on a sunny afternoon, and the undergrowth consists of dense thickets of rhododendrons. Travis and Derek planned to hike about 8 miles on the first day, camp near Fall Creek, and return by the evening of Sunday, August 18th. Sarah Langley noted that Travis never missed a deadline. He was too responsible to just stay in the woods unannounced. Yet at 9 o'clock on Sunday night, her son's phone was still out of range, and there was no sound of an engine on the road outside the house. Sarah Langley's anxiety, which she later described as a physical cold that permeated her entire body, led her to call the Swain County Sheriff's Office on Monday, August 19th at precisely 8 o'clock in the morning. She reported that the 2 young men had not returned from the trail, and the last activity on their cell phones was recorded on Saturday morning near the trailhead. Because Travis and Derek had a reputation for being disciplined students and had never gone missing before, the case was opened immediately, without waiting the standard 48 hours. At 9 o'clock 15 minutes on Monday morning, a patrol team found the boys' silver Ford Ranger on the side of the road near the Silver Mountain trailhead. The car was locked, and there were no signs of forced entry or damage. Inside, on the passenger seat, there was Derek's cap and a printed map of the area, with a pencil outline of the area near the so-called Whitebird Bluff, a rocky area often referred to by locals as a cursed place due to the high number of accidents. According to the officer who conducted the initial inspection of the vehicle, it looked as if the boys had simply gotten out of the car and headed into the forest, not expecting any threat. A full-scale search operation began at 10 o'clock in the morning of the same day. 20 volunteers, dog teams, and a U.S. Forest Service helicopter were involved in the search. The eerie silence of the forest, according to the group members, was interrupted only by the barking of dogs, which, however, quickly lost their trail on the rocky ground. On the second day, August 20th, at 12:30 in the afternoon, one of the groups discovered the boys' campsite 6 miles away. The picture that opened up to the rescuers was extremely strange. 2 tents had been neatly disassembled and folded, but the sleeping bags were left unrolled on the damp ground. In the center of the camp was an untouched supply of food, 2 cans of canned beans and an open packet of crackers, around which forest insects had already begun to gather. It made no sense, the official report of the head of the search team said. If they are running away from a threat, they do not dismantle their tents. No signs of struggle, blood, or wildlife were found at the site. According to the ranger who inspected the fire pit, The fire had been lit only once, presumably on Saturday night, after which it went out on its own. It seemed that the boys were preparing to leave, but for some reason left behind their most valuable belongings, including Derek's jacket and Travis's small tripod. On the fourth day of the search, August 22, the rescuers focused on a hard-to-reach area near the Whitebird Cliff. On the very edge of the cliff, at an altitude of about 3,000 feet above sea level, they found clear footprints of slipping shoes on wet moss and several broken branches of mountain laurel. Investigators noted in the report that the angle of the slope at this location is critical, and a fall down leaves no chance of survival. However, an examination of the bottom of the gorge with climbing equipment yielded no results. The deep gully was littered with fallen tree trunks and rocks, and heavy rains on Sunday night could have washed any biological traces into the underground waterways that cut through this part of the Cascade Mountains. By the end of the week, the number of volunteers began to rapidly decline. 16 miles of trail and surrounding areas were combed several times. On Friday, August 23rd, the sheriff of Swain County issued an official press statement saying that the main version of the investigation was an accident. According to the reconstruction of the events, one of the boys may have slipped on the edge of the cliff, and the other, trying to help, also fell down. The bodies were presumed lost in crevices or drawn down by groundwater. For both families, this conclusion was a disaster. Sarah Langley continued to set the table for 3 people every night for months afterward, refusing to accept her son's death without direct evidence. Robert Langley spent hours in Travis's room, looking through his old field notes and digital archives on his computer, hoping to find even a hint that his son might have been planning a reroute. But the Appalachian Trail remained silent. The case was officially suspended and archived as a tragic disappearance. The forest seemed to swallow up the 2 friends forever, leaving their parents with only emptiness and the eerie memory of an abandoned camp among the rhododendrons. On September 7, 2015, at 6 o'clock 40 minutes in the morning, Arthur Miller, a 52-year-old logging truck driver, was driving along an abandoned forest road, number 42, 15 miles from the spot where the tourists disappeared 2 years earlier. According to his account, which he later provided to the Swain County Sheriff's Office, visibility that morning was limited due to the dense fog that characterizes this part of Appalachia in early fall. On one of the sharp curves, the truck's headlights picked up a white spot on the side of the road. At first, Miller assumed it was a large piece of plastic or dumped trash, but as he drew closer, the figure began to move. According to the driver's testimony, there was a person sitting on the edge of the road whose appearance defied common sense. He was not waving or asking for help. He just stared straight ahead, unblinking, until I stopped the car, Arthur Miller wrote in the initial interrogation report. He was an emaciated young man whom the driver did not immediately recognize from the wanted posters that had faded on the walls of local gas stations for 2 years. The most striking detail was his clothes. He was wearing an old, dirty wedding dress with lace. The fabric, once white, was now the color of damp earth, covered with moss stains, pine needles, and stains from years of moisture. The long hem of the dress was torn and turned into a dirty rag that dragged on the stones. Miller called the emergency services at 6 hours and 55 minutes. He tried to talk to the boy before the patrol arrived, but he did not say a word. The Bryson City Police arrived 30 minutes later. Officer David Coles, who was one of the first to approach the victim, noted in his report that the young man was in a state of deep catatonic shock. His eyes were wide open, but his pupils hardly reacted to the light of the flashlight. When the officer tried to make physical contact with him, he shuddered with his whole body, making only a barely audible wheeze. 10 hours and 20 minutes in the morning of the same day became the moment that forever divided the lives of Sarah and Robert Langley into before and after. When a police patrol showed up on their doorstep, Sarah says she was prepared to hear about the discovery of the remains. However, the news that Travis had been found alive 15 miles from the trailhead sent her parents into a state of near hysteria. The officer said he was alive, but his eyes were blank when he said it. I realized that my son had returned, but he was not the same boy we had seen off on the hike, Sarah recalled during a conversation with journalists from a local newspaper a week after the incident. Travis Langley was rushed to Swain Community Hospital. A medical examination by a team of doctors, led by Dr. Thomas Green, revealed the patient's critical condition. At the age of 21, Travis weighed only 105 pounds, indicating long-term malnutrition and vitamin deficiency. On his arms and legs, doctors recorded numerous scars of varying degrees of age. Some of them were deep scars that resembled marks from ropes or plastic ties on his wrists. Numerous thermal burns and small cuts were also found, which, according to experts, had appeared during the entire 24 months of his absence. It was the wedding dress that raised the most questions among the hospital staff and detectives who arrived to secure the ward. When the nurses tried to remove it for hygiene procedures, it turned out that the garment was secured to Travis's body with a complex weave of old pins and even rough stitches of thread sewn through the edges of the fabric. The dress was too big for an emaciated young man, but it clearly belonged to someone who kept it as an heirloom. The forensic experts who seized the garment as evidence noted that the lace bore traces of incense and stagnant dampness, typical of basements or caves. During his first 48 hours in the hospital, Travis showed no sign of conscious communication. He lay in a hospital bed, curled up in a fetal position, staring at a single point on the wall. Dr. Green confirmed that the patient was in a state of reactive psychosis. Any loud sound, even the rustle of paper or the sound of heels in the corridor, caused him to have an attack of severe tremors. Physical contact from the medical staff caused the young man's heart rate to jump to 140 beats per minute, and his breathing became intermittent. The parents were allowed to see their son only on the second day, but this meeting did not bring relief. Robert Langley recalled that when he called his son's name, Travis did not even turn his head. His gaze remained glassy, and his hands, covered with numerous scratches, clutched the edge of the white sheet tightly, as if he were still trying to hold on to the wedding dress that had been taken from him. For the Swain County Police, Travis's return signaled the reopening of a case that had already been covered in dust. The main question facing the investigation remained unanswered. Where was the boy for 730 days, and what happened to Derek Stanton? The fact that Travis came out of the woods dressed as a woman indicated that his disappearance was not an accident or a simple wander in the mountains. Someone was holding him, someone had broken his psyche, and someone had forced him to become part of a horrific scenario, the details of which were yet to be determined. Round-the-clock security was set up around the hospital, as detectives did not rule out that the person who let go or lost Travis could be somewhere nearby, watching every move of the police. Travis Langley had returned from the world of shadows, but he brought with him a silence that seemed heavier than any scream. While doctors fought for his physical survival, investigators tried to understand how a zone of absolute lawlessness and madness could exist for 2 years, 15 miles from a popular tourist destination. There were interrogations ahead that would shed light on Derek's fate, but at the time, the only source of information was a guy who was afraid of even his own reflection in the hospital room window. On September 28, 2015, at 10 o'clock in the morning, Travis Langley was first brought to the Swain County Sheriff's Office for official interrogation. Despite the fact that the young man's physical condition had somewhat stabilized after a 3-week hospital stay, his mental status remained extremely fragile. According to the protocol of the medical examination conducted immediately before the transportation, Travis was still under the influence of sedatives, but the doctors gave permission for brief investigative actions. Interrogation room number 4, with its faded gray walls, was the place where law enforcement hoped to get an answer to the main question: where 22-year-old Derek Stanton was now. For the Stanton family, Travis's return was a painful glimmer of hope. For 2 years, they had been in contact with the police, and when they learned of Langley's disappearance, they demanded immediate answers. The investigation also considered the possibility that the boys could have been held captive together and Derek could still be alive in the same area where Travis spent 730 days. Detectives Michael O'Sullivan and Edward Gibbs, who were conducting the interview, later recalled that the atmosphere in the room was so tense that the silence seemed almost physical. Travis was sitting across from the detectives, his fingers tightly interlocked. As described by Detective O'Sullivan, the young man avoided direct eye contact, focusing his gaze on the scratches on the wooden surface of the table. Every time the sounds from the corridor became louder, he would shudder with his whole body. When the investigators first said Derek Stanton's name, Travis began to have severe hand tremors, which he tried to hide by pressing his palms to his knees. When asked if he had seen his friend in the past 2 years, he would only close his eyes and begin to rock rhythmically in his chair. According to the audio recordings of the interrogation, detectives used a variety of tactics, from gentle sympathy to direct pressure. They showed photos of Derek taken shortly before his disappearance and images from the place where they last parked. However, Travis remained emotionally distant. According to the report of a criminal psychologist, this reaction could be the result of severe dissociation, a defense mechanism of the psyche that blocks traumatic memories. However, the police began to suspect something else. Perhaps Langley's silence was not a medical condition, but a deliberate attempt to conceal the crime. During the interrogation, special attention was paid to the wedding dress in which Travis was found on the road. Detective Gibbs tried to find out the origin of this garment, but every mention of white lace caused the young man to have a panic attack. Travis fought an exhausting internal struggle. From his later stories, rehabilitation specialists learned that in those moments he was afraid that the truth about the wedding rituals and the distorted reality of his captor would seem like a crazy invention or delusion to the police. He was afraid that telling them how he was forced to play the role of another person would completely deprive him of the trust of the law. Travis's silence only reinforced the version of a possible conflict between the friends. Investigators began to analyze the nature of Langley and Stanton's relationship, looking for ulterior motives for the murder. A working hypothesis emerged in police archives. The two guys could have quarreled on the route due to a lack of resources or personal animosity, which led to a fatal clash. According to this version, Travis could have killed Derek, hidden the body, and invented the story of the kidnapping and strange clothes as part of a complicated alibi to avoid responsibility by being declared insane. At 12:45, after almost 3 hours of fruitless conversation, Detective O'Sullivan put a picture of a smiling Derek Stanton on the table and asked quietly, "Travis, where is your friend? His parents are waiting for him, just like yours were waiting for you." There was a long pause in the room that lasted about 2 minutes. According to protocol, Travis slowly raised his head, his lips trembling and his face turning white as chalk. He whispered so softly that the microphones barely picked up the sound. "Derek is gone." Those 3 words instantly changed the course of the investigation. Travis Langley's status in official documents was changed from victim to prime suspect. For law enforcement, such a confession without any explanation of the circumstances of his death was a de facto confirmation of guilt. The detectives assumed that Travis could not withstand the pressure and surrendered, but was still trying to hide the details of the murder. At the end of the interrogation at 13 hours and 15 minutes, Travis was not returned to the hospital, but transferred to a pre-trial detention center under enhanced surveillance. The news that Langley had actually confessed to his friend's death quickly leaked to the press, causing a wave of outrage in Swain County. Residents of the town, who had previously sympathized with the family, now looked at Travis as a cold-blooded killer who had been hiding somewhere for 2 years before emerging with an absurd story. While Travis remained in isolation, refusing to eat or communicate further, the police were preparing for a new phase of search efforts. They were sure that Derek was dead, and now their task was to find his remains to prove Travis's guilt in court. Every fact in the detective's hands at the time seemed to testify against the young man in the wedding dress. However, no one in the sheriff's office realized that the real proof of Travis's innocence was not in his words, but in his body, and that the solution to the case lay much deeper in the wilds of the Appalachian Trail than they could have imagined. But at that point, for the system, Travis Langley was the only person who could be responsible for Derek Stanton's death, and the suspect's silence only made the noose around his neck tighter. Before we dive into the most mysterious part of this investigation, I ask you to subscribe to the channel, like and comment below this video. Your engagement helps YouTube's algorithms promote this content so that many more people can see the story. This is the best way to support the channel's growth. Thank you, and keep it up. On September 30th, 2015, the Swain County Sheriff's Office officially focused all resources on the premeditated murder of Derek Stanton by his friend Travis Langley. Travis's phrase, "Derek is gone," uttered during the interrogation, was interpreted by the investigation as an indirect confession. Detectives Michael O'Sullivan and Edward Gibbs proceeded from the logic that during the 2 years of staying in the forest, a conflict over resources or due to psychological exhaustion would inevitably arise between the young men. The search teams were ordered to research the area around Whitebird Cliff, but this time to look not for living people, but for hidden grave sites or bone fragments that could definitively confirm the guilt of the only surviving witness. However, the first serious crack in this version appeared on October 1st at 14 hours 30 minutes, when the sheriff's office received a detailed forensic report number 48. Dr. Arlene Vance, the state's lead pathologist, conducted a second and more in-depth examination of Travis Langley's body. The main focus was on the scars on the young man's back and shoulders, which were initially thought to be the result of a fall or wandering through dense undergrowth. According to Dr. Vance's findings, there were 8 parallel scars on Travis's shoulder blades and lower back, each 3 to 5 inches long. The nature of the injuries, the depth of the cuts, and the angle of entry into the soft tissue indicated that they were not caused by random branches or stones, but by a blunt metal object or a whip made of rough leather. But the key was the analysis of the impact vector. The examination found that the wounds were inflicted by a person standing behind Travis and acting exclusively with his right hand. This fact was a critical turning point in the case. Derek Stanton's mother, Margaret Stanton, during a second interview, confirmed a detail that the investigation had previously considered insignificant. Her son was left-handed from birth. He had never used his right hand to perform forceful actions. The nature of Travis's injuries ruled out the possibility that they had been inflicted by Derek. Thus, a third person appeared in the case, an unknown subject who had physical superiority and had been using violence against Travis Langley for a long time. In parallel with the medical examination at Swain Community Hospital, sessions with a post-traumatic stress disorder specialist, Dr. Elizabeth Warner, began. Travis was still in a state of deep depression, but under the influence of sedatives, he began to experience what doctors call flashbacks. These episodes lasted from 30 seconds to 2 minutes and were accompanied by intense motor excitement. According to Dr. Warner's notes, during the October 4th session, Travis suddenly straightened up on the bed and began to describe a person he called the Master. According to a reconstruction of his words, he was a man of medium height with glassy eyes, whose gaze seemed fixed and devoid of any human emotion. Travis described him as a cruel and unfair judge who acted according to his own logic, which no one understood. In his memoirs, this man never raised his voice, but his presence caused paralyzing fear. The most specific detail in Travis's testimony was the olfactory and tactile images. He repeatedly mentioned the persistent, suffocating smell of incense, which mingled with the aroma of raw, newly excavated earth. According to the young man, this smell haunted him every day, signaling the beginning of a process he called transformation. In these moments, Travis claimed, the man with glassy eyes forced him to be not himself. When Dr. Warner asked what exactly this meant, Travis began to tremble and only repeated the phrase, "white cloth," which was a symbol for him of the loss of his own identity. The investigative team, analyzing this fragmentary data, began to change the vector of the investigation. The search for a possible serial kidnapper or hermit became a priority. The psychological profile, based on Travis's testimony, painted a portrait of a person with a severe personality disorder who was prone to religious or ritual fetishism. The smell of incense in combination with the wedding dress indicated that the kidnapper was not just holding the victim, but was trying to recreate an event from the past or realize a painful fantasy of a wedding or eternal devotion. On October 5th, Detective Gibbs discovered a reference in a 20-year-old case file to an abandoned mine 13 miles north of the Appalachian Trail. According to a local forester, traces of people were sometimes seen there, but the police never checked the site during the search for the boys in 2013 because it was outside the alleged area of their disappearance. Travis Langley's condition remained critical at the time, but his status as a suspect was officially lifted. The detectives realized that the words, "Derek is gone," were not a confession of murder, but a statement of the tragedy he had witnessed. However, Travis's silence about the circumstances of his friend's death was not due to a desire to hide the truth, but to his panicked fear of the man with glass eyes, who, in his opinion, could still be around. The investigation found itself in a situation where the only clue was in the twisted mind of a young man who could not distinguish reality from his nightmares. The wedding dress found on him was now seen not as a masquerade, but as a symbol of 2 years of torture, where Travis was forced to play a role in someone else's deadly game. The detectives knew that to find Derek and the man behind this nightmare, they needed to identify the owner of the glass eyes and understand why the Appalachian Trail had become his hunting ground. But the main question remained the origin of the dress. Who was the woman whose outfit had now become part of the police archives, and was she the first victim of the man who hid in the shade of centuries-old pines? Each new fact only added to the chilling realization. Travis Langley was just a tool in the hands of someone who decided to deceive death itself with the help of other people's lives. On October 9, 2015, the North Carolina State Crime Laboratory completed a full analysis of the wedding dress seized as evidence after Travis Langley's return. The report number 114 stated that the white silk and French lace garment had undergone significant degradation. Experts found 3 types of mold fungi on the fabric, typical of deep layers of forest soil and rooms with a constant humidity of more than 80%. Despite heavy wear and numerous tears, a fragment of the local brand's label was preserved on the inner seam of the corset. Detectives Edward Gibbs and Michael O'Sullivan focused on the origin of the item. It turned out that the model belongs to the limited collection of 2011. Investigators began a methodical check of the archives of bridal salons in towns bordering the Appalachian Trail, from Bryson City to Asheville. At 11 o'clock in the morning on October 12th, we received confirmation from the city of Waynesville. The owner of a small atelier, the White Rose, recognized the item by the individual alterations made by the master, a characteristic cut in the lace on the back. According to the salon's records, the dress was purchased by 24-year-old Elena Vasquez 3 weeks before her planned wedding in June of 2012. Further investigation of the Swain County Police Archives revealed a tragic backstory that had not previously been linked to the disappearance of Travis and Derek. On June 15, 2012, Elena Vasquez died as a result of a fall from Whitebird Bluff. According to the materials of the case, the girl and her fiancé went for a walk to take pre-wedding photos, but according to the official version, she slipped on slippery stones. Lena's body was found 2 days later in a gorge. Her fiancé, then 29-year-old Jared Kingsley, was in a state of severe psychological distress after the death of his beloved. Detective Gibbs studied the testimonies of Jared's friends and neighbors dating back to the end of 2012. All of them described him as a man whose identity was virtually erased after the tragedy. One of Kingsley's close friends, Thomas Reynolds, recalled during the interrogation, "Jared stopped responding to the outside world. He could stare at one point for hours. His gaze became completely empty, almost glassy, as if he was looking not at you, but through you." In March of 2013, Jared Kingsley committed a series of strange acts. He hastily sold off all his possessions, including a small house on the outskirts of Waynesville, quit his job at a logging company, and disappeared without a trace. His last message was a note left on the kitchen table for his sister. The text, written in uneven handwriting, said that he was going to a place where he and Elena will be together, and asked not to look for him anymore. The police decided at the time that the man was planning to commit suicide at the site of his fiancée's death, but his body was never found, and the search was later suspended due to the lack of evidence of a crime. After analyzing these facts, Detectives O'Sullivan and Gibbs came to a startling conclusion. Jared Kingsley did not commit suicide. He went into the woods, where he was well-versed due to his professional activities, and stayed there, turning the surrounding area into a zone of his painful mourning. The wedding dress that Travis Langley was found wearing 2 years after his disappearance was the same dress that Elena Vasquez never had time to wear to the ceremony. The investigation suggested that Jared Kingsley was not just a witness, but a person who had been holding Travis for 730 days, using him as an object to compensate for his loss. The description of a man with glassy eyes provided by Travis during his flashbacks perfectly matched Kingsley's descriptions of his behavior after his fiancée's death. Moreover, the smell of incense, which the boy kept mentioning, now had a logical explanation. Jared could have been performing impromptu rituals in his hiding place, trying to preserve the moment of the wedding that never happened. If Kingsley is still in the woods, he knows every inch of this area better than any ranger, Detective Gibbs wrote in his work diary on October 13th. Investigators were confident that if they could locate Jared Kingsley's current whereabouts, he would be the key to solving not only Travis's abduction, but also to finding out the true fate of Derek Stanton. The detectives suspected that Derek could have become Kingsley's victim in the first hours after their disappearance, as he did not fit into the morbid scenario of the wedding reenactment. On October 14th at 8 o'clock in the morning, the Swain County Sheriff's Office placed Jared Kingsley on an official wanted list as a person of interest in a kidnapping and a murder suspect. The task force began analyzing geographic data. They looked for any mention of abandoned structures, hunting lodges, or natural shelters within a 15-mile radius of Travis's point of entry onto the road. Every detail from the old cloth to the smell of damp earth indicated that the perpetrator had created an isolated world around him where time stood still in June of 2012. Now the police's task was to find this hideout before Jared Kingsley, sensing danger, decided to disappear again, taking the secret of Derek Stanton's death with him. Each new document in the case added to the confidence. The relic of the past, which was this wedding dress, became not only a symbol of madness, but also the main proof that Travis and Derek had become accidental actors in someone else's bloody play. On October 16, 2015, at 9:30 in the morning, a task force from the Swain County Sheriff's Office approached a remote section of forest located 9 miles from the main route of the Appalachian Trail. The purpose of the visit was to conduct a standardized interview of a resident of the surrounding area as part of an expanded investigation into the Langley-Stanton case. However, the first minutes on site changed the status of the visit from a routine check to a large-scale forensic operation. After an initial inspection of the surrounding area and the exterior of the house, The detectives realized that the items found and the specific isolated setting were hiding something much more serious. The resident of the house was not a bystander, but the person who had been holding the missing boys for the past 24 months. An analysis of the personality of 32-year-old Jared Kingsley showed that he had lived in the area for over 3 years, leading an almost hermetic lifestyle. The investigation found that before moving to the forest thicket, Kingsley worked in the logging industry, which explained his ability to survive in extreme conditions and navigate the terrain off the marked trails. According to the psychological profile, Jared was in a state of prolonged, uncontrollable psychosis, which was caused by his inability to survive the death of his pregnant fiancée, Elena Vasquez, in 2012. Local residents, including Peter Grogan, an employee of a remote gas station, recalled a strange man who sometimes showed up to buy fuel and long-term storage products during a second interview. According to Grogan, Kingsley always avoided talking, kept his eyes down, and his body visibly tensed whenever other people approached. He looked like a person who was constantly waiting for an attack, or like someone who was afraid that his secret would be seen on his face, the official witness testimony reads. The investigation reconstructed the events of August 20, 2013. According to the revised version, Travis Langley and Derek Stanton accidentally stumbled upon Kingsley's home, delving into the thicket in search of good angles for photography. Distorted by a severe mental disorder, Jared's reality perceived the young men's appearance as an act of aggression and invasion. In his mind, they came to destroy the illusion of loneliness and memory of Elena that he had created. 20-year-old Derek Stanton, who, according to the preliminary examination of the circumstances at the scene, tried to protect his friend and actively resist the kidnapper, was killed by Jared immediately. For Kingsley, Derek was just an obstacle, which he eliminated with the cold-bloodedness of a man who had lost touch with the moral norms of civilization. Instead, 19-year-old Travis Langley became the object of a morbid, distorted projection. In a state of madness, Kingsley began to see the fragile young man as a replacement for his lost fiancée. This replacement mechanism became the basis for the 2-year nightmare Travis found himself in. For 730 days, Jared Kingsley kept the boy in complete isolation, forcing him to be part of a fictional, frozen-in-time everyday life. Travis was forced to wear the same wedding dress with lace that belonged to Elena Vasquez and play the role of a bride who had allegedly returned from the dead. From the testimonies that were later obtained from the medical staff who worked with Travis, it became known that Kingsley demanded that he observe certain rituals: prolonged silence, participation in impromptu dinners, and constant presence nearby as a mute relic of the past. Any attempt by Travis to show his own personality or remind us of who he really is was punished by brutal violence, traces of which detectives had previously found on his body. Jared Kingsley created a hermetic world in the woods where the rules of logic and time were dictated solely by his morbid imagination. Travis was forced to exist in an atmosphere of constant smell of incense and damp earth, which Jared used to create the illusion of holiness and eternity of his imaginary marriage. The detectives who conducted the initial inspection of the area around the Kingsley house noted that everything around was organized to conceal any activity. The house was camouflaged with branches and nets, making it virtually invisible from the air and to casual passers-by. Inside, the atmosphere of a preserved past reigned, where everything had its own strictly defined place in Jared's delusional system. The investigators realized that they were dealing not just with a criminal, but with a man who had completely replaced objective reality with his own dangerous scenario, in which Travis Langley's life was just a tool to overcome the unbearable pain of loss. When the task force entered the home, they did not know all the details of what was happening behind those walls, but the extent of the psychological and physical pressure Travis was enduring was clear. Jared Kingsley, the antagonist who had remained in the shadows of the Appalachian Trail for 2 years, had finally been given a name and a face, transforming from a woodland legend to a major justice target. Now the police's task was not only to apprehend the killer, but also to find irrefutable evidence of what happened to Derek Stanton on that fateful day in August 2013. On October 17, 2015, at 11:45 in the morning, the investigative team led by Detectives O'Sullivan and Gibbs began a detailed examination of the discovered cabin that had been the epicenter of Travis Langley's imprisonment for 730 days. The building, hidden under a dense canopy of centuries-old pines, turned out to be a much more complex structure than it seemed at first glance. The interior space was organized not as an ordinary hermit's dwelling, but as a painful, carefully constructed memorial dedicated to the deceased Elena Vasquez. Dozens of photos of Jared Kingsley and Elena, dating back to their years together, hung on the walls, covered with darkened wood. According to the inspection report, the photos were arranged in chronological order, creating the illusion of continuous time. Forensic experts recorded the presence of a huge number of women's things that Jared kept in perfect condition, from personal care products and cosmetics that had long since expired to entire sets of evening gowns hung in makeshift closets. The air of the room was filled with a heavy, almost tangible smell of incense, mixed with the scent of old furniture and dampness, creating the oppressive atmosphere of the preserved past that Travis had previously mentioned during his flashbacks. The results of the initial forensic analysis of the living room confirmed the investigators' worst fears. Numerous biological traces of Travis Langley were found on the metal bed frame bolted to the floor and on the inside of the door. DNA analysis finally confirmed the fact of his long stay in this place. One of the detectives noted in his report that the situation inside the cabin caused a physical sense of anxiety that was difficult to ignore. Even experienced law enforcement officers had their pulses racing as they realized the psychological and physical conditions in which the 19-year-old was being held. Every square inch of this space was saturated with the madness of a man who tried to stop death by violence against another. However, Jared Kingsley himself was not in the building at the time of the assault. The house was empty, but the signs of his presence were more than obvious. There was a plate of still warm food on the wooden table and a 2-year-old newspaper lying next to it. This indicated that Kingsley had left his hideout only a few minutes before the task force arrived, presumably having heard the sound of approaching cars or barking dogs. The realization that an armed and mentally unstable criminal was somewhere close by prompted detectives to immediately increase security measures. The search team's focus shifted to the area adjacent to the cabin. 14 feet from the back porch, among the dense thickets of pine trees and wild rhododendrons, one of the forensic scientists spotted a suspicious patch of soil. The spot was freshly dug and carefully covered with pine brushwood and dry leaves. At 13 hours and 20 minutes after clearing the top layer of soil, the searchers found human remains. Preliminary identification by the remains of clothing, a blue fleece jacket and typical hiking shoes, confirmed that it was 20-year-old Derek Stanton. According to the findings of the initial examination at the site, Derek died of a gunshot wound to the chest sustained in August 2013. The condition of the remains indicated that the body had been buried shortly after the murder. For the entire task force, this was the most difficult moment of the operation, the realization that for 730 days, Travis Langley had been literally steps away from his best friend's grave, unaware of his fate, or worse, seeing his gravesite every day from his prison window. Jared Kingsley's absence from the crime scene forced the Swain County Sheriff to urgently announce an interception plan throughout the county and surrounding states. An APB was sent out to all police stations. A 32-year-old man armed with a carbine, extremely dangerous, prone to unpredictable aggression. The police blocked all forest roads and exits from the national park, realizing that Kingsley now had nothing to lose. His memory castle was destroyed, and his main secret was revealed. As forensic scientists continued to remove evidence from the hut that had become a mute witness to the tragedy, the forest around them began to plunge into twilight. Every crunch of a branch under the officers' feet made them grab for their weapons. They knew that somewhere in this pitch-black thicket, Jared Kingsley, the man with the glass eyes, was continuing his escape, and he would stop at nothing to prevent justice from being served. The house on the edge of priorities is no longer a mystery, but it has left behind more questions about how far human madness can go when it knows no bounds. On October 18, 2015, at 6 o'clock in the morning, the Swain County Sheriff's Office announced the launch of the largest manhunt in the region's history. Following the discovery of Derek Stanton's body and evidence of Travis Langley's prolonged detention, the capture of Jared Kingsley became a matter of national security. The search involved more than 150 state police officers, federal agents, and special forces. All exits from the forest within a 50-mile radius were blocked by roadblocks, and helicopters with thermal imaging equipment flew over the dense Appalachian canopy around the clock. Despite the enormous resources, there were no results within the first 96 hours. Jared Kingsley, who had studied these mountains for years and knew every cave and hunting trail, seemed to have vanished into the fog. The task force's reports indicated that tensions among the local population had reached a critical point. Residents of Bryson City and Waynesville were locking their doors, fearing the appearance of an armed madman with nothing left to lose. The press began to speculate that Kingsley might have committed suicide or gone so deep into the mountains that the search for him would drag on for decades. However, on October 22nd, at 16 hours and 30 minutes, a police helicopter crew detected movement at the very top of Whitebird Bluff. It was the same rocky area where Elena Vasquez died 3 years ago and where the tragic story of Travis and Derek began. According to the detention protocol, the man's figure was motionless. He was sitting on the very edge of the priority altitude, dangling his legs over a gorge more than 3,000 feet deep. The ground capture team approached the location 40 minutes later. Officers who participated in the assault later described a scene that looked more like a sickening theatrical production than the capture of a dangerous killer. 32-year-old Jared Kingsley sat with his back to the police, unresponsive to orders to raise his hands or lie on the ground. His gaze was directed into the emptiness of the gorge, and in his hands he was clutching an old gold wedding ring, which, according to later reports, belonged to Elena. Officer David Coles, who was the first to come within 40 feet, noted in his report that Kingsley appeared to be completely detached from reality. When the handcuffs finally snapped around his wrists, he offered no physical resistance. Jared only slowly turned his head toward the police and quietly asked one single question, which was captured by the body cameras. "Where is she?" In his warped mind, Travis's 2-year captivity and Derek's murder were merely means to get back the one he lost on that very cliff. After his arrest, Jared Kingsley was taken to a maximum security detention center. The forensic psychiatric examination, which lasted more than 120 hours, found him sane despite the presence of a severe psychotic disorder. The experts concluded that Jared was aware of his actions, although he was acting within his own delusional logic. He was formally charged with first-degree murder, kidnapping, and false imprisonment. In 2016, the court sentenced Kingsley to life without parole. The story that shocked the country ended legally, but for its main witness, the real struggle was just beginning. Travis Langley spent the next 2 years in closed rehabilitation centers where the best trauma specialists worked with him. According to rehabilitation therapist Elizabeth Warner, Travis had to relearn basic things: how to make independent decisions, wear normal clothes, and not flinch at the sound of people's footsteps. Today, Travis lives under a different name in a state thousands of miles from the Appalachian Trail. People around him describe him as a quiet but deeply centered man. He rarely leaves the house after sunset and completely avoids wooded areas. For him, the forest is no longer a place for photography and ecological research. It is now a zone of eternal darkness where his identity once died. At the site of Jared Kingsley's former cabin, the National Park Service has completely dismantled all the structures. The area was leveled and sown with wild grasses in an effort to erase any trace of the 2-year nightmare. However, tourists passing by the Whitebird Cliff still recall the story of the guy in the wedding dress and how easily civilization can dissolve in the shadow of someone else's madness. Documentary footage of Travis's rehabilitation, recorded as part of a program to support victims of violence, shows a young man standing by a window looking out at the cityscape. His every step, even in a safe environment, remains cautious, as if he can still feel the raw Appalachian soil beneath his feet. The case was a reminder that wilderness hides not only predators, but also people whose inner hell can consume anyone who accidentally takes the wrong path. The final point was made, but the knot tied in August 2013 will forever remain scarred in the memory of those who knew the true price of Travis Langley's silence.